The baker's hand clamped around Delilah Rose's wrist like an iron shackle, his face purple with rage as he yanked the stolen loaf from inside her threadbare coat. And for a moment, she thought this was how her story would end, arrested and thrown into a cell to rot for the crime of wanting to live another day. The autumn sun beat down on Las Animas, Colorado in 1882, turning the dusty Main Street into a ribbon of gold and brown, and the small crowd that had gathered around the bakery entrance murmured with a mixture of sympathy and judgment. Delilah was 22 years old, gaunt from weeks of hunger, her dark blonde hair hanging in limp strands around a face that would have been beautiful if desperation had not hollowed out her cheeks and put shadows under her green eyes. "Thief! I will see you locked up for this," the baker shouted, spittle flying from his thick mustache. His German accent made the words sound even harsher, and Delilah could not find the strength to struggle against his grip. She had known the risk when she slipped that loaf under her coat, but hunger had a way of making even the most honest person into a criminal. 3 weeks since, she had arrived in this Colorado town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken promise from a man who had sworn to marry her. He had left her stranded at the train station in Denver, disappearing with what little money she had saved from her work as a seamstress back in St. Louis. She had made her way south on foot, taking odd jobs where she could find them, but Las Animas was a small town and work was scarce, especially for a woman alone with no family and no references. "Please," she whispered, but the word came out so soft that the baker did not even hear it. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges, and she realized dimly that she might faint right there in the street. "How much does she owe you?" The voice cut through the commotion like a knife, deep and steady, and carrying an authority that made the baker pause. Delilah turned her head and saw him for the first time, a tall man in dusty riding clothes, his hat tipped back to reveal a sun-bronzed face with startling blue eyes. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. A star gleamed on his chest, the badge of a deputy marshal, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to handle trouble. "Deputy Quinn, this woman is a thief," the baker sputtered, though his grip on Delilah's wrist loosened slightly. "She tried to steal a loaf of bread right from under my nose." "I asked how much she owes you," the deputy repeated, and this time there was steel beneath the calm tone. He stepped closer, and Delilah caught the scent of leather and horses and something clean like soap. "Name your price, Heinrich." The baker's face worked through several expressions before settling on grudging calculation. 15 cents for the bread, plus another 10 cents for the trouble and the insult to my establishment." Deputy Owen Quinn reached into his pocket without hesitation and produced a silver quarter, which he placed in the baker's palm with deliberate precision. "There. She is paid in full with interest. Now let her go." Heinrich released Delilah's wrist so suddenly that she stumbled and would have fallen if the deputy had not caught her elbow. His hand was warm and strong through the thin fabric of her sleeve, and when she looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that was not pity, but rather a kind of fierce protectiveness that made her throat tighten. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly, and the gentleness in his voice after the baker's fury was almost more than she could bear. 2 days ago," she admitted, and saw his jaw tighten. "Heinrich, give her the bread," Owen said, and it was not a request. The baker thrust the loaf at Delilah with ill grace, and she clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold. The deputy kept his hand on her elbow, steadying her, and addressed the dispersing crowd with a tone that brooked no argument. "Show is over, folks. Go about your business." The onlookers scattered, some disappointed at the lack of drama, others nodding approvingly at the deputy's intervention. When they were relatively alone, Owen looked down at Delilah with those impossibly blue eyes and said, "You are coming with me." Fear spiked through her exhaustion. "Are you arresting me?" "No, miss. I am taking you to get a proper meal, and then we are going to figure out what to do with you." He paused, then added with surprising gentleness, "You look like you are about to fall over, and I would rather that did not happen in the middle of the street." She wanted to argue, wanted to preserve some shred of her dignity and refuse his charity, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled slightly, and his other hand came up to steady her, and she realized that she had no choice but to trust this stranger who had paid for her crime and was now looking at her like she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. "Save your thanks until after you have eaten," he said, and there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She forced her legs to cooperate, and together they made their way down the dusty street toward a small restaurant with a painted sign that read Maria's Kitchen. The smell of cooking food hit her as soon as Owen opened the door, and her stomach clenched so hard it hurt. A plump Mexican woman behind the counter looked up and broke into a wide smile when she saw the deputy. "Owen, you come for lunch." Her English was accented but clear, her dark eyes warm with genuine affection. "Maria, this young lady needs a meal. Bring her whatever you have that is ready, and plenty of it." He guided Delilah to a corner table and pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "And some water, please." Maria's expression shifted to concern as she took in Delilah's appearance, but she asked no questions, just bustled away and returned moments later with a pitcher of water and a glass. Delilah drank like someone dying of thirst, the cool liquid almost painful as it went down her parched throat. Owen sat across from her, his hat now resting on the table, and watched her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is your name?" he asked. "Delilah Rose." Her voice was steadier now, the water helping. "I am sorry for the trouble. I did not mean to cause a scene." "You are sorry for being hungry," he shook his head. "That is nothing to apologize for. What brings you to Las Animas, Miss Rose?" The shame of it burned in her chest, but she owed him the truth. "I came west with a man who promised to marry me. He left me stranded in Denver with nothing. I made my way here hoping to find work, but there is none to be had, or at least none that anyone will give to a woman without references." Something dark flashed across Owen's face, anger on her behalf, and it warmed her in a way she had not expected. "The man who left you is a coward and a fool," he said flatly. "You are better off without him, though I know that does not solve your immediate problems." Maria arrived with a plate piled high with beans, rice, tortillas, and chunks of tender beef in a rich sauce. The sight of it made Delilah's eyes sting with tears, and she had to blink them back as she picked up her fork with shaking hands. She forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to shovel the food in as fast as possible. Owen watched her for a moment, then looked away, giving her the privacy to eat without being scrutinized. "This is the best thing I have ever tasted," she said after she had made a significant dent in the plate, and Maria, who had been hovering nearby, beamed with pleasure. "You eat as much as you want, Mija. There is plenty more." As Delilah ate, Owen filled her in on the basics of Las Animas. It was a small railroad town, he explained, with about 500 souls, mostly working the cattle ranches that surrounded it or serving the needs of the railroad. He himself had been deputy marshal here for 2 years, having come from Kansas after his parents died. He had a small ranch about 3 miles out of town, nothing fancy, just a cabin and enough land to run a modest herd of cattle and a few horses. He lived alone, did most of his own cooking and cleaning when he was not on duty in town. "Why are you telling me all this?" Delilah asked, setting down her fork. She had managed to eat about half the plate, and already she could feel strength returning to her limbs. Owen leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes direct and honest. "Because I have a proposition for you, Miss Rose, and I want you to understand what you would be getting into before you answer." Her heart began to beat faster. "What kind of proposition?" "I need someone to help run the ranch. I am gone most days dealing with martial business, and the place is falling into disrepair because I do not have time to keep up with everything. You need work and a place to stay. I am offering you both." He held up a hand before she could respond. "Separate accommodations, of course. There is a small bunkhouse on the property that is weatherproof and has a wood stove. I would expect you to handle the cooking and cleaning, tend the vegetable garden, help with the chickens and such. In return, you would have room and board and a small wage, say $5 a week to start." Delilah stared at him, torn between hope and suspicion. "Why would you do this for a stranger? A thief?" "You are not a thief," he said firmly. "You are a woman who was pushed to desperation. There is a difference, and I am doing this because I need the help and you need the work. It is that simple." But it was not that simple, and they both knew it. A single man taking a single woman into his home, even with separate accommodations, would cause talk in a town like Las Animas. Owen seemed to read her thoughts because he added, "People will gossip no matter what we do. But Maria here will vouch for my character, and so will Marshal Hendricks and half the decent folks in town. I am not offering anything improper, Miss Rose, just honest work for honest pay." "He is a good man," Maria said firmly from behind the counter. "You will be safe with him, I promise you this." Delilah looked between them, trying to see the trap, the catch, the hidden price she would be expected to pay. But Owen's eyes were steady and clear, and Maria's nod was encouraging, and the alternative was going back out into the street with nowhere to go and no prospects. "I accept," she said quietly, "and thank you. I will work hard, I promise you that." "I believe you," Owen said, and his smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Finish your meal and then we will get you settled. Do you have any belongings?" "Just what I am wearing." The admission stung, but it was the truth. Everything she had owned was either lost or sold during her desperate journey from Denver. "We will remedy that," Owen said. "Maria, put her meal on my tab. Miss Rose, when you are ready, we will stop by the general store and get you some necessities." The next hour passed in a kind of dreamlike haze. Owen took her to the general store, where he calmly purchased fabric for 2 new dresses, undergarments, a warm coat, sturdy boots, and various toiletries, all without blinking at the cost. The store owner, a thin man named Mr. Peterson, raised his eyebrows but said nothing beyond the usual pleasantries. Delilah tried to keep track of the mounting debt in her head, determined to pay Owen back somehow, but he waved off her protests. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said as they carried the parcels out to his horse, a magnificent bay gelding named Copper. "You cannot work if you do not have the proper clothes and supplies." He helped her up onto Copper behind him, and she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance, the bundles secured behind the saddle. The contact was startling in its intimacy. Her body pressed against the solid warmth of his back, and she tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had touched her with kindness. They rode out of town as the afternoon sun slanted long and golden across the prairie, following a rutted track that wound through stands of cottonwood and past fields where cattle grazed on the autumn grass. The Quinn ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well kept. The main cabin was built of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a covered porch across the front. A barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop, a small corral, and the bunkhouse Owen had mentioned, which was really little more than a sturdy shed with a window and a door. But to Delilah, who had been sleeping in haystacks and under bridges for weeks, it looked like paradise. Owen dismounted and helped her down, his hand spanning her waist, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and smell the clean masculine scent of him. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat, and grabbed the parcels. "Let me show you the bunkhouse first." Inside, the small structure was basic but clean, with a narrow bed, a wood stove, a table and chair, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. A rag rug covered part of the plank floor, and gingham curtains hung at the single window. "I know it is not much," Owen said, setting the parcels on the table, "but it is dry and warm, and you will have your privacy." "It is perfect," Delilah said, and meant it. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, having a door she could close and a bed to call her own felt like a luxury beyond measure. Owen showed her the rest of the property, pointing out the well with its hand pump, the vegetable garden that had gone mostly to seed, the chickens that needed tending, and the root cellar dug into the side of a small hill. "I will not lie to you," he said. "There is a lot of work to be done, and I have let things slide, but I think between the two of us we can get it back in shape." "I will not let you down," Delilah promised, and he smiled at her, that same warm expression that made something flutter in her chest. "I know you will not. Now, I will leave you to get settled. There is a trunk in the corner there with some linens and blankets. Make yourself comfortable, and when you are ready, come up to the main cabin. I will get supper started." He left her alone, and Delilah stood in the middle of her new home, hardly able to believe the change in her fortunes. This morning she had been a thief caught in the act, and now she had a job, a place to live, and a strange cowboy deputy who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she had experienced in months. She unpacked her new belongings with careful hands, folding the fabric and placing the toiletries on the small shelf near the washbasin Owen had filled from the well. Then she found the linens in the trunk and made up the bed, the simple act of tucking in corners and smoothing blankets almost bringing her to tears with its normalcy. When she finally walked up to the main cabin as the sun was setting, she found Owen in the kitchen, a large room that took up half the cabin's interior. He had a fire going in the stove and was slicing salt pork with competent efficiency, a pot of beans already bubbling away. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the pump by the sink. "You are welcome to wash up if you like. There is soap in the dish there." Delilah scrubbed her hands and face, the cold water from the pump shocking but wonderful, and when she dried off with the clean towel Owen provided, she felt more human than she had in ages. "Can I help?" she asked. "You can slice that bread if you like." He nodded toward the loaf she had stolen that morning, which sat on the counter, and they both smiled at the irony. "Tomorrow we will figure out a proper routine, but tonight let us just get through supper." They worked together in companionable silence, and when the food was ready, Owen set 2 places at the rough wooden table that dominated the other half of the cabin. The meal was simple, just beans and pork and bread, but after weeks of hunger, it tasted like a feast to Delilah. They ate without talking much, both tired from the day, and afterward she insisted on washing the dishes while Owen saw to the horses. When he came back in, his hair damp from where he had obviously dunked his head in the horse trough, he found her drying the last plate. "You did not have to do that tonight," he said. "You must be exhausted." "I wanted to. You have done so much for me already." She set the plate in the cupboard and turned to face him, suddenly shy in the lamplight. "I do not know how to thank you, Deputy Quinn." "Owen," he corrected gently. If we are going to be working together, we should use first names. And you do not need to thank me, Delilah. Just do the work and we will call it even." The sound of her name in his deep voice did strange things to her pulse, but she nodded. "All right, Owen. Good." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming almost awkward. "I will let you get some rest. If you need anything during the night, do not hesitate to knock. I am a light sleeper." "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Delilah." She walked back to the bunkhouse under a sky thick with stars, the cool October air crisp and clean in her lungs. Inside, she changed into the simple nightgown that had been among her purchases and crawled under the blankets on her narrow bed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe, and she fell asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. The next days fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and deeply satisfying. Delilah woke before dawn and made her way to the main cabin, where she stoked the fire and started breakfast while Owen tended the animals. They ate together as the sun came up, planning out the day's tasks, and then Owen would often ride into town for his martial duties, while Delilah tackled the endless work of keeping a homestead running. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and airing out the musty corners. She harvested what remained of the vegetable garden, storing pumpkins and squash and the last of the potatoes in the root cellar. She mended Owen's clothes, patched holes in the roof of the chicken coop, and learned to churn butter from the cream of the cow Owen kept in the barn. The work was hard, but it was honest, and every night she fell into bed with the bone-deep satisfaction of having earned her keep. Owen was an easy man to work for, patient when she made mistakes and generous with his praise when she got things right. He taught her how to gather eggs without getting pecked, how to judge when bread dough had risen enough, and how to read the sky for signs of coming weather. In turn, she brought order and comfort to his bachelor existence, darning his socks and making sure he had hot meals waiting when he came home from long days chasing cattle thieves or settling disputes between ranchers. They talked while they worked, gradually learning each other's stories. Owen told her about growing up in Kansas, the son of farmers who had worked themselves into early graves trying to tame the harsh prairie. He had drifted west after their deaths, working as a ranch hand and then a deputy, looking for something he could not quite name. He had ended up in Las Animas almost by accident, following a job posting, and had stayed because he liked the mix of mountains and plains, the way the Arkansas River cut through the valley, and the decent folks who populated the town. Delilah, in turn, told him about her childhood in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress who had died of consumption when Delilah was 16. Her father had remarried quickly, and the new wife had made it clear there was no room for a nearly grown stepdaughter. Delilah had worked in a dress shop, saving every penny, dreaming of a better life. When Robert had come along with his smooth words and promises of marriage and a home in Colorado, she had believed him. She had given up her job, spent her savings on the train ticket, and followed him west, only to be abandoned the moment they reached Denver. "I was such a fool," she said bitterly one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set behind the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. "I should have known better than to trust a man I barely knew." "You were not a fool," Owen said firmly. "You were hopeful, and there is no shame in that. The shame belongs to him, for taking advantage of your trust." She looked at him in the fading light, this quiet cowboy who had saved her from her own desperation and asked nothing in return, and felt something shift in her chest. Over the past 2 weeks, she had come to rely on his steady presence, the way he listened when she talked, the rare smiles that lit up his serious face. He was nothing like Robert, with his flashy charm and easy promises. Owen was solid and real, a man who showed his care through actions rather than words, and Delilah found herself drawn to him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. The first frost came in mid-October, coating the prairie in white lace that melted as soon as the sun hit it. Delilah spent the day making preserves from the last of the wild plums she had gathered, filling the cabin with the sweet scent of cooking fruit. Owen came home early, having finished his rounds in town, and found her elbow-deep in suds, washing the sticky jars and pots. "You have been busy," he said, admiring the rows of sealed jars on the counter. "I wanted to make sure we had something good for the winter." She pushed a strand of hair out of her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a smudge of soap. "How were things in town?" "Quiet, mostly." He hung his hat on the peg by the door and came to lean against the counter beside her. "Though Marshal Hendricks did mention that he has been getting questions about you." Her stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "The usual gossip. People wondering about the propriety of our arrangement." He sighed. "I told him to tell anyone who asked that you are my employee and that is all, but you know how people talk." "Maybe I should find somewhere else to work," Delilah said quietly, though the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Owen, made her chest ache. "I do not want to damage your reputation." "To hell with my reputation," Owen said, and the vehemence in his voice startled her. "You are not going anywhere, Delilah, unless you want to, of course. But if you are thinking of leaving on my account, do not. I do not care what the gossips say." She looked up at him and found him already watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw. "I do not want to leave," she whispered. "I am happy here." "Good." His voice had gone rough, and he reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away and wipe the smudge of soap from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was feather light, but it burned through her like wildfire. "I am happy you are here too." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things, and Delilah realized with sudden clarity that she was not the only one feeling this pull. This connection that had grown from gratitude and companionship into something deeper and more complicated. But before either of them could say or do anything more, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard shattered the spell. Owen stepped back, his hand dropping, and turned toward the door just as someone knocked loudly. "Deputy Quinn, you in there?" Owen opened the door to reveal a young ranch hand, dusty and agitated. "What is wrong, Tommy?" "Rustlers hit the McBride place last night. Took about 20 head. Marshal Hendricks sent me to fetch you." Owen muttered a curse under his breath and grabbed his hat. "Tell him I will be there in 10 minutes. He turned to Delilah, apology written across his face. "I am sorry I have to go. This could take a while." "Be careful," she said, and he nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a long moment before he strode out into the night. Delilah listened to the sound of Copper's hooves fading into the distance, and then finished washing the dishes in the now quiet cabin, trying not to worry about rustlers and bullets and all the dangers that came with wearing a badge in the Wild West. Owen did not return that night, nor the next day. Delilah kept herself busy with chores, but as evening fell on the second day with no word, she began to genuinely worry. She was feeding the chickens when she heard horses approaching, and her heart leaped with relief. But when she turned, she saw 2 men she did not recognize riding into the yard, both of them rough-looking and unkempt, with guns on their hips and calculating expressions. "Well, well," the first one said, dismounting with a lazy grace that set alarm bells ringing in Delilah's head. "Pretty little thing out here all alone. Where is Quinn?" "He is not here," Delilah said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but he will be back soon." "Is that so?" The second man dismounted as well, and they moved to flank her, cutting off her path to the cabin. "We have been watching this place." Quinn rode out 2 days ago and has not been back since. So you are lying, darling, and we do not appreciate that. Fear flooded her system, sharp and cold. What do you want? We want Quinn to stop interfering in our business, the first man said. He has been a thorn in our side for too long, poking his nose into things that do not concern him. We figured we would leave him a message, something to make him think twice before he comes after us again. Delilah understood then, with sickening clarity, that these were the rustlers Owen had gone after, and they had doubled back to hurt him by hurting her. She threw the bucket of chicken feed at the first man's face and ran, not toward the cabin but toward the barn, where she knew Owen kept a rifle. She could hear them cursing behind her, their boots pounding the dirt, and she knew she would not make it, but she had to try. A hand caught her arm and yanked her backwards, spinning her around. She kicked and clawed, fighting with the desperate strength of the cornered, and managed to rake her nails down one man's face before the other grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. "Feisty," he said in her ear, his breath hot and foul. "I like that. Let her go." Owen's voice cut through the struggle like a whip crack, and Delilah sagged with relief, even as her captors stiffened. She twisted her head and saw him standing at the edge of the yard, his rifle aimed steady at the man holding her. He was covered in dust and looked like he had ridden hard, his face set in lines of cold fury. "Let her go now and ride out, and maybe you walk away from this. You going to shoot us, deputy?" the man with the scratched face said, though his hand had moved away from his gun. "With your girlfriend in Jake's arms, you might hit her." "I will not miss," Owen said flatly, and there was such absolute certainty in his voice that both rustlers believed him. The one holding Delilah, Jake, hesitated for just a second, and in that second Owen moved. He closed the distance between them with startling speed, swinging the rifle like a club. The stock caught Jake in the temple with a sickening crack, and he dropped like a stone, releasing Delilah. She stumbled forward, and Owen caught her with one arm, keeping the rifle trained on the second rustler with the other. "You have about 5 seconds to get on your horse and ride," Owen said. "Your friend will wake up with a headache, but he will live. If you are still here when I reach 5, I start shooting. 1. The rustler did not wait for 2. He hauled Jake's semi-conscious form onto a horse, mounted his own, and galloped out of the yard in a cloud of dust. Owen kept the rifle up until they were out of sight, and only then did he lower it and turn to Delilah, his face stark with concern. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I am all right," she managed, though she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "You came back." "I rode all night when I realized they had given us the slip." His arm was still around her, solid and warm, and she leaned into him without thinking. "I was so afraid I would be too late. Delilah, I am so sorry. I never should have left you alone. You could not have known." She pulled back enough to look up at him, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. "Owen, I was so scared, but not just for me. I was terrified something had happened to you. I am fine. We caught most of the gang, but those 2 slipped away, and when Marshal Hendricks mentioned he had seen them heading this direction, I knew." His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I knew they would come here, and I have never been so scared in my life." "But you saved me," she whispered. "Again. Delilah." Her name was a prayer on his lips, and then he was kissing her, hard and desperate and full of all the fear and relief and longing that had been building between them for weeks. She kissed him back with everything in her, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the 2 of them, alive and safe and together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've been trying so hard not to do that," he admitted. I did not want you to think I expected anything from you, that I had some ulterior motive in bringing you here." "I know you did not," she said, "and I have been trying just as hard not to want you to, but Owen, I cannot help it. I think I have been falling for you since the moment you paid for that bread. I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you standing in that street, too proud to beg even when you were starving," he said, and the simple honesty of it made her heart clench. "I know it is fast, and I know you have been hurt, and I will wait as long as you need me to. But I need you to know how I feel. I love you, Delilah Rose. I want you to stay here not as my employee but as my wife, if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were good tears, the kind that came from too much feeling rather than too much pain. "I will have you," she said. "I love you too, Owen. I do not need more time. I know what I want, and it is you and this life we are building together." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, and when he pulled back he was smiling that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his face. "Then we will go into town tomorrow and speak to the minister. I am not waiting any longer than I have to." They went inside together, and Owen made her sit by the fire while he heated water for tea, fussing over her until she laughed and pulled him down beside her on the old sofa. They sat close together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and talked about the future. They would marry as soon as possible, Owen declared, and damn what the gossips said. He wanted her to be his in every way that mattered, wanted the whole world to know she belonged to him and he to her. "We will build onto the cabin," he said, already planning. "Add a proper bedroom and maybe another room for when children come. I do not have much, Delilah, but what I have is yours. I will work hard to give you a good life." "You already have," she said. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a home and your heart, and that is more than I ever dreamed of having." They stayed up late into the night, making plans and stealing kisses, and when Delilah finally returned to the bunkhouse, she lay in her narrow bed and hugged herself with joy, hardly able to believe that the nightmare of the past months had transformed into this unexpected blessing. True to his word, Owen took her into town the next morning, and they spoke to Reverend Matthews, who agreed to marry them the following Sunday. The Reverend was a kind man with sharp eyes, and he looked between Owen and Delilah with a knowing expression. "I take it this has been coming for a while?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Owen said, his hand warm on the small of Delilah's back. "I know it seems quick to outsiders, but I have never been more sure of anything." "Love does not run on a timetable," the Reverend said. "I will be happy to marry you, Deputy Quinn, Miss Rose, Sunday at 2 o'clock. "Perfect," Delilah said, and Owen squeezed her hand. They spent the rest of the day in town, spreading the word and making arrangements. Maria, when she heard the news, let out a cry of delight and hugged Delilah so hard she could barely breathe. "I knew it," she crowed. "I knew from the first day that you two belonged together. Oh, Mija, I am so happy for you. Will you stand up with me?" Delilah asked impulsively. "I do not have any family here, and I would be honored if you would." Of course, of course." Maria was already planning, talking about food for a celebration and flowers and what Delilah should wear. "We will make it beautiful, you will see." Owen's witness would be Marshall Hendricks, a grizzled lawman in his 50s who clapped Owen on the back and said, "About damn time you settled down, boy. That little lady is the best thing that ever happened to you." "I know it," Owen said, looking at Delilah with such love in his eyes that she felt her heart might burst. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Delilah sewed herself a new dress from beautiful blue calico that Maria helped her pick out, and Maria's daughters, who were close to Delilah's age, came out to the ranch to help with the work and to giggle over wedding plans. Owen threw himself into improving the cabin, working late into the evenings to build a new bedroom onto the back, determined that his bride would have a proper place to sleep. They were scrupulously careful about propriety during that week, never alone together for more than a few minutes, but the longing looks they exchanged spoke volumes. At night, Delilah would lie in the bunkhouse and think about what it would be like to finally be his in every way, and the anticipation was both sweet and almost unbearably intense. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the late October sky a brilliant blue. Delilah dressed in her new gown with Maria's help, and Maria wove wildflowers into her hair and stepped back to admire her handiwork. "Hermosa," she said, "Owen will not be able to breathe when he sees you." The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town, with what seemed like half of Las Animas crammed into the pews to watch. Delilah walked down the aisle alone, chin high, and saw Owen waiting for her at the altar in his best suit, his dark hair slicked back and his blue eyes blazing with emotion. When she took her place beside him and he reached for her hand, she felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Reverend Matthews spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage and the covenant they were making before God and witnesses. Delilah barely heard the words, too focused on Owen's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. When it came time for the vows, Owen's voice was steady and clear. "I, Owen Marcus Quinn, take you, Delilah Ann Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful and true, in good times and bad, in sickness and health. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Delilah repeated the words, her own voice strong despite the tears threatening to fall. "I, Delilah Ann Rose, take you, Owen Marcus Quinn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by your side all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful and true in good times and bad, in sickness and health. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Owen slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him. And then Reverend Matthews was pronouncing them man and wife, and telling Owen he could kiss his bride. Owen gathered her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the congregation, and when he finally released her, both of them were grinning like fools. The celebration afterward was held in Maria's restaurant, which she had closed for the occasion. There was music and dancing, platters of food and toasts with whiskey and wine. Delilah danced with Owen, with Marshall Hendricks, with half the men in town, but it was Owen's arm she kept returning to, Owen's smile she sought out across the crowded room. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, he leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Quinn?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she whispered back. "Please." They said their goodbyes amid much teasing and ribald jokes, and rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. Owen helped her down from Copper with exaggerated care, and then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "I am carrying you over the threshold properly," Cape announced, and she laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he kicked open the door to the cabin. Inside, the main room glowed with lamplight, and Owen set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "Delilah," he said, and her name had never sounded so good. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted, "but more excited than nervous." "Good. Because I plan to take my time with you tonight, Mrs. Quinn. I have been dreaming about this for weeks." He cupped her face and kissed her, slow and deep, and she melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. He tasted like whiskey and wedding cake, and when his lips moved to her throat, she gasped and clutched at his shoulders. "Owen," she breathed, and he smiled against her skin. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let me show you our new bedroom." He led her through the cabin to the addition he had built, and she caught her breath at what he had done. The room was simple but beautiful, with a large bed covered in a quilt that must have taken him months to order, a dresser with a mirror, and a washstand. Candles burned on every surface, filling the space with soft golden light, and wildflowers stood in a jar on the dresser, their sweet scent perfuming the air. "Owen, it is perfect," she said, turning to him with tears in her eyes. "You did all this for me, for us," he corrected. "This is our home now, our life, and I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be special." He came to her and began slowly unfastening the long row of buttons down the back of her dress, his fingers deft despite the slight tremor in them. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like," he murmured. "I want this to be good for you." "It will be," she assured him, reaching up to help him with his collar. "I trust you." They undressed each other slowly, learning the planes and curves of each other's bodies, and when they finally came together in the big bed, it was with a tenderness and passion that took Delilah's breath away. Owen was patient and careful, guiding her through her nervousness, and when the brief moment of pain gave way to pleasure, she clung to him and whispered his name like a benediction. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, and Delilah felt a completeness she had never known before. "I love you," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I cannot believe this is real, that you are really mine." "I am yours," he said, kissing her forehead, "for as long as we both shall live, and beyond that if there is any justice in the universe. You are my heart, Delilah Quinn." They made love again in the deep hours of the night, slower and sweeter, and then slept wrapped in each other's arms as the wind whispered around the cabin and the stars wheeled overhead. The first months of their marriage were a time of profound happiness. Delilah settled into her role as Owen's wife with a contentment that still sometimes surprised her. She kept the house and tended the animals and cooked meals that Owen praised extravagantly. He continued his work as deputy marshal, but always came home to her, and they fell into an easy rhythm of companionship and love. Winter came early that year, blanketing Las Animas in snow and sending temperatures plummeting. Owen taught Delilah to shoot, reasoning that she should be able to defend herself if trouble came calling when he was away. She proved to be a decent shot, and the day she hit 3 bottles in a row, Owen whooped and spun her around in the snow, both of them laughing like children. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting together, content in each other's presence. Owen told her stories about his adventures as a lawman, and Delilah shared memories of her childhood, the good parts before her mother died. They made plans for the future, talking about expanding the herd, maybe buying the adjacent parcel of land, building a proper house when they could afford it. In January, Delilah began to feel unwell, queasy in the mornings and exhausted by midday. At first, she thought it was just a winter illness, but when it persisted for more than a week, Maria took one look at her and said knowingly, "You are with child, Mija." The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Delilah had never thought much about motherhood, but now, with the evidence of it growing inside her, she felt a fierce protectiveness for this tiny life. She told Owen that night after supper, her heart in her throat, unsure how he would react. His face went through a series of expressions, surprise, wonder, and then pure joy. "Truly?" he asked, and when she nodded, he let out a whoop and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "We are going to have a baby. Delilah, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy? I am over the moon. I am terrified and thrilled, and I do not have any idea what I am doing, but yes, I am happy. So incredibly happy." He set her down and immediately started fussing, pulling out a chair and making her sit, asking if she needed water or food or a blanket. She laughed at his sudden protectiveness and pulled him down beside her. "I am fine, Owen. I am just pregnant, not made of glass. I know. But you are carrying our child, and I intend to take very good care of you." He rested his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression awed. "When? Late summer, I think. August, perhaps." "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly, and kissed her with such tender reverence that she felt tears spring to her eyes. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Delilah often felt tired and Owen hovered like a mother hen. He took on more of the chores, insisting she rest, and brought her little gifts from town, ribbons and sweets and a book of baby names. They argued good-naturedly over names, Owen favoring strong traditional names while Delilah leaned toward something more unique. In April, tragedy struck the town. A gang of outlaws rode through, robbing the bank and killing a clerk who tried to resist. Owen and Marshal Hendricks were part of the posse that pursued them, and Delilah spent 3 agonizing days waiting for word, terrified that she would lose her husband before their child was even born. When Owen finally returned, exhausted and sporting a bandage on his upper arm where a bullet had grazed him, she threw herself into his arms and sobbed with relief. "I thought I lost you," she said over and over, and he held her and whispered reassurances until she calmed. "I am all right, love. It is just a scratch. We got them, all of them. They will hang for what they did." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious. "But this scared me too, Delilah. I have been thinking. I do not want to spend my life chasing outlaws, always wondering if I am going to come home. I want to be here with you and our baby. I am going to tell Marshal Hendricks I am stepping down. We have enough saved, and with the ranch, we can make it work." "Are you sure?" she asked, even though the thought of him giving up the danger of his badge filled her with relief. "I know you love the work. I love you more," he said simply. "And I want to be a husband and father more than I want to be a lawman. The decision is made, Delilah. I am done." He was true to his word. By the end of the month, he had turned in his badge and was working the ranch full-time. He bought more cattle and hired a young ranch hand named Billy to help with the heavier work. The extra income helped, and with Owen home every day, Delilah felt safer and happier than ever. Summer came, hot and dry, and Delilah grew round and uncomfortable. Owen was endlessly patient, rubbing her swollen feet and bringing her cool water and telling her she was beautiful even when she felt like a beached whale. Maria and her daughters visited often, bringing baby clothes they had sewn and advice for the impending birth. On a sweltering August afternoon, Delilah's pain started. Owen sent Billy racing into town for the midwife, and then paced the floor like a caged animal while Maria stayed with Delilah, coaching her through the contractions. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Delilah thought she could not bear it, but Owen held her hand and whispered encouragement, and Maria was a rock of calm competence. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Delilah gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Maria announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket and placing him in Delilah's arms. "A big, healthy boy." Delilah looked down at her son, at his red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love unlike anything she had ever known flood through her. Owen leaned over, his own face wet with tears, and touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You did it, Delilah. He is absolutely perfect. What will you name him?" Maria asked. Owen and Delilah looked at each other, and Delilah said, "Samuel. Samuel Matthew Quinn." "Samuel," Owen repeated, testing it out. "I like it. "Hello, Samuel. I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do my best to be a good one." The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Owen's, and in that moment, watching her husband fall in love with their son, Delilah knew that every hardship she had endured had been worth it to arrive at this perfect, shining moment. The years that followed were filled with the joys and challenges of raising a family and building a life together. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 2, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, who had Delilah's green eyes and blonde hair and her father's quiet thoughtfulness. The ranch prospered under Owen's hard work, growing from a modest operation into one of the more successful spreads in the area. He and Delilah built the larger house they had dreamed of, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for their growing family and any guests who might visit. Delilah's vegetable garden became the envy of the county, and she started selling preserves and baked goods in town, earning pin money that she saved carefully. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Owen proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with the children, always ready with a story or a game at the end of a long day. Delilah marveled at the way he could gentle a skittish horse or calm a crying baby with equal skill, his big hands surprisingly tender. On their 5th anniversary, Owen took Delilah into town for dinner at Maria's, leaving the children with Billy, who had become part of their extended family. Over plates of Maria's famous enchiladas, Owen reached across the table and took Delilah's hand. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "How could I forget? I was at my lowest point and you saved me." "You saved yourself," he corrected. "You had the strength to survive, to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. I just gave you an opportunity." "You gave me everything," she said, squeezing his fingers. "A home, a family, a love I never dreamed I would find. Every day I wake up grateful that you walked into that bakery when you did." "I am the grateful one," Owen said. "You brought light and warmth into a house that was just walls and roof. You gave me purpose beyond just existing. You made me believe in the future. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come more easily with each passing year. "I love you too, Owen Quinn. I always will." They sat in the warm glow of the restaurant, hands linked across the table, and Delilah thought about the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. She had left St. Louis chasing a false promise, had been abandoned and desperate, had stolen bread to survive and been caught in the act. And yet that terrible day had led her here, to this man, this life, this love. When they returned home that night, the children were asleep, and Owen built up the fire in the fireplace while Delilah checked on Samuel and Caroline. She stood in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep, and felt a fierce surge of protectiveness and gratitude. These were her babies, hers and Owen's, proof of their love made flesh. Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we all are." She turned in his arms to face him. "And I am thinking that I might be pregnant again." His eyes went wide. "Truly, I think so. It is early yet, but the signs are there." A slow smile spread across his face, that beautiful rare smile she had fallen in love with. "Another baby." "Delilah, that is wonderful. You are not worried. 3 children is a lot. 3 children is a blessing," he said firmly. "We will manage, we always do." He kissed her softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing me, for staying, for building this life with me. For loving me even when I do not deserve it." "You deserve all the love in the world," she said, and meant it. You are a good man, Owen Quinn, the best man I have ever known." They stood there together in the quiet house, holding each other as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, and Delilah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not in St. Louis, not in some grand house in a big city, but here in this cabin in Colorado, with this man and these children and this simple, beautiful life. The third baby, another boy they named Thomas, arrived the following spring, and the house rang with laughter and occasional chaos. Owen hired another hand to help with the ranch work, giving him more time to spend with his family. He taught Samuel to ride and helped Caroline learn her letters, and rocked baby Thomas to sleep singing old cowboy ballads in his rumbling baritone. As the years passed, Delilah watched her children grow, Samuel into a tall, serious boy who wanted to be a rancher like his father, Caroline into a bright, cheerful girl who loved animals and had a gift for healing, and Thomas into a wild, adventurous child who kept them all on their toes. She and Owen grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season, becoming something strong and unshakable, the bedrock on which their family was built. On a warm evening in late September, 15 years after that fateful day in the bakery, Delilah sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze, and Owen was seeing to the horses in the barn. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and alone, and the woman she had become, surrounded by love and purpose. Owen came out of the barn and spotted her on the swing. He climbed the porch steps and sat beside her, his weight making the swing rock gently. He put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, and she smiled. "Everything. Nothing, just how good life is. It is good, is it not?" He kissed the top of her head. "Better than I ever imagined it could be. Do you ever regret it? Giving up being a lawman, tying yourself down to a wife and family?" "Not for a single second," he said without hesitation. "This, right here, is the life I was meant to live. You are the woman I was meant to love. Those years before I met you feel like I was just wandering, waiting for my real life to start. And then there you were, this fierce, proud woman trying to survive, and I knew you were the one." "I knew it too," she admitted. "Maybe not that first day, but soon after. You were kind when you had no reason to be. You saw me, really saw me, not just a thief or a charity case. You gave me back my dignity along with a job and a home. You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day," Owen said. "You gave me everything that matters." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, watching their children play and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Samuel caught sight of them and called, "Mama, Papa, come see what Thomas found." Owen stood and held out his hand to Delilah, pulling her to her feet. "Duty calls," he said with a grin, and they walked down into the yard together, hand in hand, to see what new adventure their youngest had discovered. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Delilah and Owen lay together in their room, the window open to let in the cool night air. Owen traced lazy patterns on her arm, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Owen," she said softly, "thank you for saving me, not just that day in town, but every day since. Thank you for being the man you are, for loving me the way you do." He tightened his arm around her. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, Delilah, maybe more. I was alone, going through the motions, not really living. You taught me what it means to have something worth fighting for, worth coming home to. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. So thank you for seeing something in a dusty cowboy that was worth loving." "I saw everything worth loving," she whispered. "And I always will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. And as the years continued to unfold, through good times and hard times, through laughter and tears, sickness and health, they held fast to that love, the foundation on which everything else was built. Samuel grew up and took over more of the ranch work, eventually marrying a sweet girl from town and building his own cabin on the far side of the property. Caroline became the town's healer, her gentle touch and natural skill with medicine making her beloved by all. Thomas, true to his wild nature, became a horse trader, traveling throughout Colorado and beyond, but always coming home to the ranch where his heart belonged. Owen and Delilah became grandparents, doting on Samuel's children with the kind of indulgent love that grandparents are famous for. They grew older together, silver threading through Owen's dark hair and lines etching themselves around Delilah's eyes, marks of years lived fully and joyfully. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Owen stood and raised a glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice still strong despite his 60 years. 30 years ago, I met a woman in front of a bakery who changed my life forever. I thought I was helping her, but the truth is she saved me. She taught me what love really means, what family means. She gave me the best years of my life, and I am grateful every single day that I had the courage to step in and pay for that bread." Everyone laughed and cheered, and Delilah stood and went to him, kissing him soundly to more cheers. "And I am grateful every day that you did," she said. "You are my heart, Owen Quinn, then, now, and always." As the celebration continued around them, Delilah looked at the life they had built, the family they had created, and knew that she was blessed beyond measure. She had started with nothing, had been at her lowest point, had stolen bread to survive. And from that desperate act had come everything: love and home and family, and a lifetime of happiness. The old cowboy who had paid her debt and taken her home had given her more than shelter and work. He had given her his heart, his name, and his unwavering devotion. And she had given him the same in return, building together something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would be passed down through generations of the Quinn family, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love. Years later, when they were both white-haired and moving more slowly, Owen and Delilah would still sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and holding hands. And sometimes Delilah would think back to that autumn day in 1882, to the moment when she had been caught stealing bread, and a tall cowboy with blue eyes had stepped in to change her fate. She would think about how a single act of compassion had rippled out to touch so many lives, how one moment of kindness had altered the course of her entire existence. "What are you thinking about?" Owen would ask, as he always did, and she would smile and squeeze his hand. "Just how lucky I am," she would say. "How lucky we both are." And Owen would nod and kiss her temple, and they would sit together in the golden light of another sunset. Two souls who had found each other in the Wild West and built a love that lasted through all the days of their lives and beyond, into the stories their grandchildren told and the legacy they left behind. A testament to the truth that sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings, and that love, real love, is worth more than all the gold in Colorado.